ध्यायेत् शारदचन्द्रसुन्दरमुखम् ताम्रारविन्देक्षणम् भक्ताभीष्टवराभयप्रदकरम् कौपीनमात्रोज्ज्वलम् स्वात्मानन्दरसानुभूतिविवशम् सर्वानवद्याङ्गकम् श्रीमन्तं श्रीरमणेश्वरं गुरुवरं योगासनाध्यासितम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् ध्यायेत् श्रीरमणेश्वरम् हृदयकुहरमध्ये केवलं ब्रह्ममात्रं यहमहमिति साक्षातात्मरूपेण भाति हृदि विषमनसा स्वं चिन्वतामच्युतव पवनचलनरोधात् आत्मनिष्ठो त्वम्। Namo Ramana. In this Tuesday Atma Vichara session from Ramanacentre for Learning, Bangalore, we have been reading Bhagavan's Upadesham from the book Years in the Presence of Ramana, My Master, written by Mahakrishna Swami. And after reading this week's accounts of his stay with Bhagavan and his journey with Bhagavan, we will have a 20 minutes Atma Vichara session. Following that, today, Nandakumarji would be contemplating on Atma Vichara, and then finally, we will have the concluding prayers to Bhagavan. Speaking about his experience, Mahakrishna Swami continues to say, Bhagavan Sri Ramana teaches that we must be concerned in only seeking our real identity, the divine, for we are divine in essence. Man ignores himself as the supreme self and confuses his divine nature with the profane ego, with the thinking mind. When someone says I, what is meant by this? Who is really this I? From where does it come? If man wants to know the absolute truth, he first must acquire the basic knowledge of himself. That is, this I to which he constantly refers to. For the knowledge of oneself, it is sufficient that man proposes to become identified with it in an incessant way, the supreme truth, and that in doing so, feel the right side of the chest, for it is in this region that the absolute self is reflected. This simple technique is the first step towards self-consciousness. Although this possibility depends totally on the grace of finding a master and receiving from him the sacred initiation. I was fortunate in having this experience. I lived with my master Bhagavan Sri Ramana, from whom I assimilated the whole technique of self-consciousness. Now he goes on to talk about his master under the topic, my master. From a young age, my only interest was self-enquiry, to discover, amplify, and extend myself to the Supreme Self. My parents, perceiving that I was not a common child, since I lived detached from the material world in deep meditation, resolved to, also at the suggestion of Mahatma Gandhi, took me to the presence of Bhagavan Sri Ramana. On the day of my arrival at Tiruvannamalai, I had the grace of contemplating him for the first time. This happened on Kartikai Eve, the occasion in which yearly a torch is lit on top of the mountain Arunachala in devotion to Shiva. A great multitude was present. It was a marvelous scene, the most marvelous that I had yet seen, so natural and simple. There was Arunachala. Majestic was the face of the mountain presented to those who watched from the square of the ashram, and from himself with a staff, stopping to observe a flower and to smile to a child and continuing to walk between the trees. He walked with these without haste, in a natural way, finally turning to the ashram, where a crowd awaited him. His gentle gaze and his pure expression touched the heart of all those who observed him. Even the most skeptical, those apparently indifferent, watched him without being able to hide an expression of tenderness. When I entered the hall of the ashram, there were various devotees, all Hindus, sitting in a row. I was profoundly impressed by the spiritual force that emanated from the place. I was led near Sri Ramana. The master stood up and looked at me, making a gesture with his hands for me to come closer. His face inspired serenity, unlimited goodness, and compassion. His large brown eyes contemplated the infinite above the heads of all present, and his gaze, without concentrating on anything or anyone, penetrated into the inmost depth of my heart. Sri Ramana was of a normal stature for a Hindu of the south, around 1.90 meters tall, honey-colored skin, very short white hair and white beard. I felt in him an infinitely kind being of love without end. I bowed before his spiritual greatness, and he said smilingly, "It seems that you have been called." The simple life of the ashram greatly helped me in seeking the supreme truth. The very atmosphere of the place, the invisible force of the sacred mountain Arunachala, impregnated the environment with an elevated spiritual emanation. My affection and devotion for Bhagavan Sri Ramana continued very deeply, and I felt an infinite joy in being able to be with the Sadguru. In this way, I became conscious of the enormous grace of his presence, His warm smile was a signal for me to take my seat in the hall, in a place where he could watch me during meditation. What was most impressive was his attitude, which was so natural that he let everyone at ease, removing in each one any and all analysis or criticism, involving everyone in the purest universal love. In the course of the time that I lived with Sri Ramana, I observed that he appeared to be very attentive to all that went on around him, reacting according to external life, however, without being involved with the results of the action. I understood that, according to his teachings, the plane of physical existence is only temporary and has no reality in itself. I was absolutely aware that I was to fully follow this teaching. Otherwise, I would never become conscious of the Supreme Self. I felt that I had to increasingly develop control over my thoughts, annihilating the thinking mind if I wanted to be receptive to the subtle vibrations uninterruptedly radiated from Bhagavan. At a certain moment, he fixed me with his penetrating gaze, which acquired an indescribable intensity, a stillness, a profound peace, a levity, and infinite joy descended over me. He said to me, "Silence is the most powerful form of teaching, transmitted from master to disciple. The voice without sound is pure intuition. It is the voice of spiritual sound that speaks to the deepest part of ourself and reveals to us the original nature of the creator of the cosmos." I repeat Bhagavan's words. Silence is the most powerful form of teaching, transmitted from master to disciple. The voice without sound is pure intuition. It is the voice of spiritual sound that speaks to the deepest part of ourself and reveals to us the original nature of the creator of the cosmos. I immediately felt that absolute certainty that the whole teaching for spiritual consciousness would simply be assimilated from the sacred presence of Bhagavan Sri Ramana. I began then to synonymize myself with the meaning of his Upadesha, silent instruction, with the force of sacred initiation with his teachings. I tried them in myself and discovered that meditation is a truth, and this truth can help everyone to become conscious of their unity with the divine universal self. Despite my young age, I lived with Bhagavan Sri Ramana, learning directly from his sacred presence the whole technique of self-knowledge. With him, I learned how to annihilate the mind and consequently control the body and the senses. I discovered that the world is composed of ideas and things, and therefore, with the practice of meditation taught by him, it was possible for me to undo each idea and each thing. Only the Supreme Self remained, the absolute truth that we all are in essence. Here Natarajanji highlights this part of the text. The years in which I stayed at the ashram marked me forever. The consciousness of being was never extinguished, and Sri Ramana was always present in me. Unquote. I repeat that. The years in which I stayed at the ashram marked me forever. The consciousness of being was never extinguished, and Sri Ramana was always present in me. The true relationship between master and disciple does not create bonds of dependency nor feelings of possession. On the contrary, the objective of the master is the emancipation of the disciple to become free from any bond, even in relation to the master himself. I had this experience in a manner as unexpected as it was remarkable. Sri Ramana used to gaze longly at Arunachala. He said that the mountain was an energy center so powerful that there was certainly a corresponding place on the other side of the globe, the other extreme of the axis, capable of polarizing as much spiritual energy as Arunachala. So sure he was about this that he asked a disciple to find an atlas and verify his affirmation. In showing us a map with all countries, his finger landed on India. My eyes and those of all present accomplished the master's gesture. His glance, always so sublime and sweet, left that region and with his other finger indicated a country on the another continent so far away to us. The form of the country indicated was similar to that of India, and one of the disciples read aloud, Brazil. Sri Ramana remained in this mood for some time, which I can't say was short or long, for his visage appeared to shine more than usual. His figure uniting the two countries, brothers by geographic shape and now united by that bridge that became Bhagavan, was majestic. He looked from one point to the other, absorbed, contemplative. A profound silence hung over the scene as if something special was happening. Slowly, with a calm gesture, which was typical, he took away the hand that pointed to India. He remained pointing to Brazil. He stared at me fixedly. I felt perfectly the force of my master. I was used to his gaze, but this time it was different. He faced me, looked once more to the map, and affirmed that I would go to Brazil. His voice, which was so familiar to me, contained something new, something special, something strong. My master had just pointed out my destiny. His voice resounded within me, and the image of his finger pointing to a direction never left me. From this day on, a certainty was born in me. Bhagavan prophesied my destiny. This would be fulfilled inevitably. He ordered me to cross the seas. For me, very young at the time, all of this appeared mysterious, remote. The teachings of Sri Ramana was transmitted with the naturalness of the truth of all that is. They were natural and true. They were natural and true as the sun, as the growth of trees, as the flow of rivers. I received them in a manner equally natural and true. I let them grow and bear fruits. Bhagavan is the eternal presence because he is the self. Bhagavan is perfect joy because he is the consciousness of being. This is Mahakrishna Swami's account of Bhagavan, which is so profound, how Bhagavan takes care of each of us by his abundant love by His constant looking upon us every moment, and we all are privy to it, whether it is in the materialistic way or in the spiritual way. He knows how to take care of us. And the only thing that we need to do is ever remember Him, absent to all other differences. If we can keep meditating only about Him, thinking about Him, His teachings, however which way, if we can stay connected with Him, that is the only thing that needs to be done. All the other part will be taken care by His abundant love and grace. With Bhagavan's immense grace, with which alone we have come to this most direct path, for the next 20 minutes, let us practice Atma Vichara. In Atma Vichara, no matter how many thoughts come, no matter what is the nature of those thoughts, whether a good thought, a bad thought, a spiritual thought, or a discomforting thought, and no matter how many thoughts appear, we diligently inquire to whom is this. And therefore, with every thought, it becomes clear it is only for me. And when we inquire, as Mahakrishna Swami points out, who am I? What do I refer to as I? And turn our attention from the thought to the source of the thought, to the source of the I. Here and now, we find the self, the master, present, available to us. And with repeated practice and repeatedly turning our attention away from all objects back to that one truth which alone is, Bhagavan assures that the mind will gain enough strength to abide and remain there. With Bhagavan's immense grace, for the next 20 minutes, let us practice Atma Vichara. Namo Ramana, Namo Ramana, Nandakumarji. Over to you, sir.
Namo Ramana. Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramana. In Bhagavan's teachings, there is neither bondage nor liberation. There is no one bound, no one trying for liberation. This is the Ajata Siddhanta, that the self is beyond bondage, beyond birth. Therefore, it is beyond any need for liberation or having to cross the death as a hurdle and get liberated. But then Bhagavan understands that our experience as the sadhakas, as jivas, is very gross, that we feel that this whole cosmos is so huge and that we are a small bit of consciousness trapped inside a body which is so minuscule. And this drishti is also krama, the sadhana is also krama, and the mukti maybe sometime when we don't know the whole scheme of things. That is the experience of the sadhaka, that the whole thing appears so gross and so much trapped is the individual consciousness. How does he move and help us move from this kind of solid bondage to something where the bondage does not exist only? That there is no bondage, hence there is no liberation. How does he take us? We have the support from Bhagavan in many places, and today we can try and look at the verses 6 and 7 in Ulladu Narpadu to get some support from Bhagavan about how to move from this gross prison to somewhere where the prison does not exist only, where the consciousness is absolutely free. In verse number 6, Bhagavan says how he moves from the gross, absolutely rigid prison to the no prison state is what we are trying to get. And each of these steps are very helpful. In verse number 6, he says, Ulage ai pulangal uruver andre அவ்வைம் புலனைம் பொறிக்கு புலனாம் உலகை மனம் ஒன்று ஐம்பொறிவாயால் ஓர்ந்திடுதலால் மனத்தை அன்றி உண்டோ உலகம் வரை. Meaning that this world is nothing but the form of five senses, forms received by the five senses, grasped by the five sense perceptions, and it is the one mind that through the five sense perceptions and five senses receives the forms of the world. Hence, is there a gross world without the existence of a subtle mind or apart from a subtle mind? The gross world is dependent for its existence on the subtle mind. Is the shift Bhagavan gives from the gross to the subtle. That is, Bhagavan says what we consider as the solid world is really only the sense forms, the putting together of the five sense forms: seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. All this put together, we call it as the solid world. So they are all sense forms. We can easily understand this by knowing that bats live in a different world because they have different senses. The electric eel in the water is in a totally different world because it has different senses. The world is not out there. The world is in the way in which the jiva senses the five through the five sense forms. And the five sense forms are perceived by the sense perception. I'm pori. What is the difference? The eyes by themselves cannot give sight. The eyes are understood or picked up through the messages sent to the retina and by the electrical impulses transported to the mind, to the brain, where the world is captured as a visual picture, the sound picture. Both put together, we have some understanding of what the world is. And nowadays, the science has improved to that extent to understand that the senses don't display the reality, that they are mere acts for the jivas to survive in the limited form, is what the sciences have also come to. But the main point there is that Manomayam tat bhuvanam vadamaha. The gross world is not really a gross prison. If you understand that the gross depends on the subtle for its existence. So first step is to move from what is apparently very gross and solid to that is really not gross and solid. It is sense form, and sense form is mind form. Therefore, in the mind, the gross is one part in the mind. The mind chooses to identify with the gross and trap itself. Therefore, the mind can understand by not identifying with the gross body, it can free itself from the gross prison. But of course, it will have to deal with the subtle prison of thoughts. So Bhagavan shifts from the gross prison. The gross prison is not real. 5 billion light years, the expanse from here to some star, that is not real. What is the adhara for that gross 5 billion light years? That and the star there, the adhara is the mind stuff. In the next verse, Bhagavan would move that you have now moved from the gross to the subtle, and Bhagavan will say, Ulagum, Arivu, Ondrai Uditodungum, Enum, Ondrai Udit. There, the key point in the previous verse is Manam Ondru Aipurivaya. He doesn't say that, let us say there are about 10 satsangas here, that there are 10 minds which are perceiving through the senses. No. He says there is only one mind. Manam Ondru Aipurivaya. If you understand that, then all the sensory bodies arise only to one mind inside. There are no 10 minds or 7 billion minds out there. There is only one mind from within going through the senses, perceiving the sensory objects and feeling that some of the sensory objects are endowed with mind. But that trap comes only because the subtle mind goes out through the senses. Now, when it understands that one mind can stop identifying with the gross and make the problem into the subtle, that is the adhara for the gross. And in the next verse, Bhagavan takes us to, from the subtle, how to go to no bondage state. Ulagum, Arivum, Ondrai Uditodungu. The moment you shift from gross to subtle, you come to Yugapat Srishti, something called as Yugapat Srishti. The mind, when the mind rises, there is the world. When the mind sets, there is no world. Ulagam, Arivum, Ondrai Udit, Ondrai Odungum, Yenum, however, Ulaga Arivu Tannal Olirum. The gross world shines or is revealed by the mind, by the Ulagarivu. Ulagarivu தோன்றி மறைதற்கிடனாய் தோன்றி மறையாதுளிரும் பூன்றமாம் அஃதே பொருள். The mind, for it to rise and set, there is the adhara of the self, which does not rise and set. In self-enquiry, you come from the raising mind to that self which does not have raising and setting. That means which does not have any bondage, and therefore no liberation is required. From gross world, Bhagavan moves to the subtle. Ulagai manam ondru ஐம்பொறிவாயால். There is only one mind. Through the five senses, it perceives the world. The world is nothing but one mind. And in the next verse, Bhagavan comes, Ulagam Arivu Ondrai Udithu Ondrai Odungu. What is the advantage of Yugapat Srishti? We feel that the universe is 14 billion years ago. I am a simple Jiva born 60 years ago, 62 years ago. And now how many janmas I have to take to do sadhana and come out of this bondage? That is the feeling we have as a Jiva. But Bhagavan, what he does in verse number 6, he shifts from the gross prison to the subtle prison. The gross prison does not exist without the subtle silken strands of the mind. The mind is the adhara. Therefore, move from the gross to the subtle. And in the subtle, the Krama Srishti over a huge period of time is now shifted to Yugapat Srishti. To help understand Yugapat Srishti, Bhagavan will use waking and deep sleep. As soon as you wake up, the consciousness rises, the mind rises first, and then the senses, and then the world. And while going to sleep, as soon as the consciousness subsides, there is no perception of the world. The world also subsides. So every moment that the mind is present as adhara for the gross is a moment, is an opportunity for liberation. That means from gross bondage, having krama liberation, krama mukti, Bhagavan brings us to Yugapat Srishti, Yugapat Mukti. That means that is the sudden liberation. Sudden liberation in the sense every moment is an opportunity to come out of this prison by going to the source. So, Ulagum Arivu Ondrai Udithu Ondrai Odungum. You imagine what kind of freedom Bhagavan brings from shifting from the gross prison to Yugapat Srishti. That which we feel, I was trapped like this, I was put through meditation by so and so, then I went through all this, and then I came to this point. I don't know how I will be abiding. I know I have come to the silence sometimes. When am I going to abide? When it is going to be abiding? All these questions are answered by Bhagavan by saying that there is no such time period of sadhana at all. That you are not that consciousness which was like this, which moved like that, and which came off like this, and when it is going to be liberated, no one knows. You are not that consciousness. You are the consciousness that rises, and as soon as it rises, the world rises. When you set, the world immediately sets. So every moment is an opportunity for liberation. So in Yugapat Srishti, we have not yet come to no bondage state, but we have moved from Krama Mukti to sudden liberation, to immediate liberation. There is bondage, but then every moment there is an opportunity for liberation. How to find out that liberation? Ulagam Arivum Ondrai Udithu Ondrai Odungum Enum. Ulagu Arivu Tannal Olirum. So which is the cause? The mind is the cause, the gross world is the effect. So don't go to try and find out the solutions in the gross world. If you find solution for gross problems in the gross world, you will create new gross problems. If you ask the scientists, they will tell you in the gross world, they were having atoms. Then they discovered electrons and protons. Then science came up with new problems. They felt that they have gone to fundamental particles, but actually the problems became more. The not known became more. When they found quarks and other quantum particles which are smaller than electrons and protons, then the whole area became much more complex. the more they find in the gross, the problem becomes more complex, not less. So the gross has to be settled in the subtle. Your problems in the gross, the physical pain, Bhagavan would say to Kunju Swami, has to be understood that the gross will be like that, and the understanding reduces the suffering. Pain may not be avoidable, but suffering of the mind is avoidable. So shift from the gross to the subtle. As soon as you shift from gross to subtle, you have moved from Krama Srishti, Krama Mukti to Yugapat Srishti and Yugapat Mukti. Every moment is an opportunity for Mukti. But how do we move from there to no bondage? Is for the mind to rise and set, there is the self which does not rise or does not set. For that we have self-enquiry. When the mind rises, don't follow the rising mind in that moment, but inquire, for whom is this rising mind? For me. Who am I? Even with effort, we understand that in the stilling of the eye, there is no bondage, there is no liberation, there is no thought of bondage. When there is no thought of bondage, where is the thought of liberation left? Though it is with effort, even in practice of self-enquiry, we can understand Bhagavan's teachings of the Ajatavada, where there is no bondage, hence no liberation is required. And the movement is given by Bhagavan in verses 6 and 7. From gross, move to the subtle. In the subtle, understand that there is only one mind which is creating all this. And the rise and set of the mind is the rise and set of creation. So from Krama Srishti to Yugapat Srishti, and from Yugapat Srishti to Ajata, the self which has no birth, no death, no bondage, hence no thought of liberation. This is the beauty of Bhagavan's teachings. Let us take the benefit of Bhagavan's blessings and do the sadhana of Atma Vicharam, which is the direct path to realizing the self. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Ramanaya. Namo Ramana, sir.
Namo Ramana, sir. We'll conclude the satsang with prayers to Bhagavan. Apara Satchit Sukhabaridashe Yasyornimatram Bhuvanam Samastam Guhahitam Tam Ramanam Gabhiram Chinta Vihinam Hrudi Chintayami Chinta Vihinam Hridi Chintayami. Namo Ramana. Thank you, sir.